We are doing this webinar, uh, first of all, because there's a project that we just wrapped up at the NYU Maritime Transportation and Land Use Program about a 3D train station. We're going to show you, but also we are going to talk a lot about this with Michael Aronson. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and Michael, so for people who don't know what Michael's reporting has done, the current plan for the Gateway tunnel. So right now there are only two mainline tracks between New Jersey and Penn Station. They are, I don't know if they're at capacity right now, but before Corona they were. So
before COVID, at the peak of rush, that narrow 1 hour time period, they were running, a full complement of trains, and they didn't think they could add any more at that 1 hour.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this project to add 2 more tracks worth of capacity for future growth. It's called, the overall program is called Gateway. The tunnels themselves are called the Hudson Tunnel Project, or HTP. The overall cost of Gateway is at this point, what, 50?
Probably, and rising.
Yep,
billion US dollars, right?
Billion US dollars. HTP is 16, and there's actually an element of Gateway which is not HTP, which is Penn expansion, which we're going to hopefully explain why it's not good. Which just a few days ago they announced a new cost overrun. It was supposed to be 13 and is now 17 billion. So what Michael's reporting has done is that it's done a lot of things, but I mean the most relevant thing here is that the plan is they build the 2 new tracks of the HTP, but they don't immediately run 4 tracks worth of service immediately. Rather, they shut down the old tunnels 1 track at a time, 18 months each, for repairs. Michael, do you want to explain what you found about the weekend work?
Well, the Amtrak is leading this process. They own the 1910 tubes because they inherited them from the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Penn Central when they went bankrupt in 1970. Those 2 tubes, Amtrak says needs repair. That was exacerbated by damage during her Superstorm Sandy in the fall of 2012. What Amtrak wants to do is close the tube after the new pair are open. But what happened was, when the MTA realized they could repair the L train tunnel, which also had the same damage from Superstorm Sandy, nights and weekends, a report was commissioned from the London Bridge Associates in Britain, which showed that they could do the same thing with the Amtrak tubes, as well as the 2 tubes under the East River. Amtrak refuses, and Amtrak has been maintaining for years that every weekend they are using the 55-hour outage period from, I think, 10 o'clock Friday night till 5 a.m. on Monday to close 1 tube and do work. It's actually not true. They run service equivalent to 1 tube, but probably 90% of the time, both tubes are open for service. Maybe 5% of the weeks, they are closing 1 tube for repairs. And this only came out when I had to do a FOIL of Amtrak's records, which shows that they rarely, about once a quarter, 4 times a year, close 1 of the tubes for 55 hours. Why is that important? It shows that there are 95% of weekends available for the full repair work, which the MTA and London Bridge Associates shows can work. Amtrak is still refusing. The MTA wants to repair the East River tubes nights and weekends instead of having a nightmare for Long Island service. You could do the same thing on the Hudson, but to this day, Amtrak is insisting that only their 1910 technology, their 1910 ways of, I guess, a hammer and a chisel, whatever they use, a mule, will work, and none of the technologies that they use everywhere else in the world, in London, in the continent, in the Middle East, in Asia, to repair these tunnels, Amtrak is even willing to consider. Anyway, sorry for the aside.
Yeah, no, it's on the side. I mean, like this is like, I mean, this is how I came to know Michael through the investigative reporting he did for the New York Daily News on this. Yeah, so this is Michael at my end. So Eric and I are co-leading the transportation and land use program at the Marin Institute of Urban Research at NYU, where we study a bunch of things related to, let's call them best industry practices related to public transportation and and things related to construction of urban subways and light rail lines. And this also, of course, includes mega projects that work like a subway, but a commuter rail, like Gateway. So we have this report that we published, which is if you go to transitcosts.com, that's where the report lives. It is we did 5 very deep case studies. We have a database of construction costs, and that essentially taught us a lot of things about and that taught us a lot of things about how some places, and unfortunately the United States among them, built very poorly. In New York has the worst construction costs in the world, so a lot of it is trying to figure out how to do it more cheaply.
Can I just give an endorsement? That we make endorsements on the editorial board, and that report, I would urge readers, even though it's 500 pages, I would urge you to take a look at it. If you're limited in time, just read the New York chapter. I think it's 80 pages or so, because of the report, they looked at transit construction costs, and they came up with places where it's low cost. I think like Turkey or a few other places where it's middle cost, maybe Italy, places where it's high cost, which is generally the United States, and then places where it's highest cost, which is New York City. Yep. On those four scales. And they looked at the Second Avenue subway and basically delineated these reasons why it was so expensive, from farming all the work out to consultants, which is happening with Gateway, which is happening with all these other projects, to insisting on building these huge stations carved out, far below the surface level. Why are you building a gigantic station? And it's the same thing happened in East Side Access, which wasn't as much the focus of the report, and Second Avenue subway. And we're not learning from this. The Daily News has tried to write about it. I know New York Post, others have written about it, but I would urge everyone, look at that study from the NYU folks, because it really shows what's wrong and what's continuing to go wrong. Anyways, back to you.
Sure. So one of the things that I tried taking a stab at is what would happen if you could redesign Penn Station based on, I don't know what to call them. I don't want to say best industry practices, because it's not like many different places are building major city stations. It's just a handful of things. Like I think Berlin, maybe Vienna, they were the only big ones in the last 20 years in the developed world. China's doing a lot, but China, I don't want to get into too much, but Chinese high-speed rail is excellent in many ways, but their train stations are not very well designed. But and so as I said, we're branching off from just pure things like subway tunneling costs to other things. And one of the things that we're taking a stab at is high-speed rail into Northeast Corridor. Huge mega project. Bipartisan infrastructure law gave $30 billion in federal funding to that and connecting things. I am told that this is a priority for the president. We commuted on Amtrak to the Senate for many years. And there are elements of that are too expensive and could be de-scoped. There are elements that are really critical and should be kept. So we're doing the kind of analysis for which is which, like how do you spend the 30 billion? And one of the things I took a stab at is Penn Station, and I wanted to share screen for a bit just to show you the applet, which is, can you share? Yeah, So this is the applet. It is Sydney with a c.h.io/fantasy Penn Station. What this is, and I urge people to play with it when they want. It's essentially a 3D level. If you are used to video games, think of it as a level in a 3D video game, except you don't shoot and there aren't monsters trying to kill you. So where we are, you might be able to see this. This is this is the structure for the Farley Post Office. Essentially what we did is we took real measurements of real parts of Penn Station that are being kept. For example, we can go into Moynihan Train Hall. It's going to be bare because we didn't include any of the existing concession bathrooms, just the dimensions. Then did a full redesign of everything between 8th Avenue and 7th Avenue. The idea is that there are plans to move Madison Square Garden. So right now, it would not look like this at all. Right now, if I stood right here, right now, what I would see is the giant structure of Madison Square Garden, the rotunda, and then behind it, I would see the skyscraper of 2 Penn Plaza. And they constrain so much of Penn Station's planning because there are many, I can't count them, I'm going to say hundreds of columns that you constantly see when you take the train. The columns are right between the tracks, or maybe some of them on the platform, and they obstruct any plan that you might make to change things. So right now you have these very low ceilinged platforms and concourses. There isn't a lot of vertical circulation. The platforms are very narrow. So at the Effective Transit Alliance, it's a nonprofit separate from NYU. We've been writing about this, about things related to how to run the trains better. And we actually tried looking for any kind of comparative example of platforms that are as narrow as those of Penn Station. They're mostly about 6 meters, 20 feet. And we couldn't really find any. We found things that are 8, 9, 10 meters. We found some things that are very narrow, don't have very high frequency-commuter trains. You could do with the current narrow platforms, but it's very difficult. What I'm showing you right now is a wide staircase with 2 escalators. You can't do that. Like this is a platform that's 11.5 meters. So take 2 platforms at Penn Station. It's about as wide as 2 of them combined, or almost as wide as 2 of them combined. So right now at Penn Station, it's going to be 1 escalator. It's not going to be a wide escalator and a narrow staircase. I mean, yes, you can exit the train that way, but it's going to be cramped.
Let me just point out for the viewers, Penn Station today has 21 tracks and 11 platforms. Is that right?
Yep. 11 platforms, 21 tracks. And
you would modify it to how many?
Yep. This is 8 platforms. So the platforms here are numbered, not the tracks. It's just that I don't need to say things like the new track 16 is the old track 21. So this is the old track 21 is the new track 8B. So 16 tracks. Some of them can be literally where existing tracks are, like 8B is 21, 1A, the southernmost, is track 1. And then if you remove all the above ground infrastructure, which means moving MSG, but City Council just gave MSG not a 10-year permit as traditional, but a 5-year permit, because so many groups. There are 2 big architecture firms, for example, with their plans for how to make Penn Station nicer. It's so-called daylighted, so you have direct sunlight on the tracks, on the platforms, which isn't the case at all today. And so this is essentially what needs to happen, or what ideally should happen with the track level to effect that. So the street level is rather, I don't know what to say, whether to call it drab or to call it not very architecturally notable, but you could make it architecturally notable. I mean, these walkways like that you see here, these could, for example, have like very notable arches, or I mean, this is still a bridge over 2 Manhattan blocks worth of stuff. You can turn it, you can make it something nice and very notable. Again, we didn't do it because there are lots of different proposals. We don't want to get into which, but the idea is that you have, so this
Now,
is,
the office tower at 2 Penn
Yeah.
Plaza above Penn Station, that would have to go under this scenario.
yep, it would have to go, but this
Then
is,
you
so
can
it's
put
a
something
sky,
else on top, right?
yeah, so it's a skyscraper, but it's not an especially large skyscraper. It's not Freedom Tower. It's 150,000 square meters, which at present costs in Manhattan, so not something very fancy like World Trade Center, but your normal Midtown Manhattan skyscraper, that's about $1 billion. So again, it's money. Penn Reconstruction, which is a plan to do a lot of things that are not this, but things like to keep the narrow platforms as they are, but add some escalators, add staircases, make the concourse. Right now there are two concourses. So this is the street level. This is the platform level. Today there are two concourses between them, lower and upper. So that would consolidate them. It's doing a lot of things, adding more entrances, widening passageways. That is budgeted at 7. So this model is, I'm gonna guess it's probably comparable scope, comparable cost. So it's a much bigger rebuild, but it's something that, because MSG is decently likely to move away. If you move MSG, you don't have the columns, you don't need to respect the columns, then everything is much easier. So these corridors are West End and East End. West End exists, East End is just to access the 1, 2, 3 trains. We didn't actually make the entire city walkable in this model. So we instead have this thing for you, which is called, which is just a glass wall that says subway 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so that's
And that's live now. That's available for anyone to look at, right?
yeah.
You should put the link in the chat.
I will. Yep, I will. So it's here. Let's put it in chat. Yep. And I'm going to all right. So do we want to take questions from chat right now, or do you want to keep talking about this a bit?
Eric, do you have anything you wanted to?
Well, I think, setting the stage a little bit on, right, so there are some plans currently to reconstruct Penn Station. We've talked a little bit about that, some of those constraints around some of these columns. I think that's clear. But I think, you want to set the stage on what this buys you moving from, 21 tracks to 16 tracks, the organization of the A and B. You talked a little bit about, the overly narrow platforms and how this gets you wider platforms, but I think talking a little bit more about some of the performance benefits would be helpful for orienting people.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that this does, so as I said, I was talking about best practices, and they then said that there aren't that many. It was mostly just Berlin. So in the Netherlands, I mean, if you think of the Netherlands in big cities, we think of Amsterdam probably, but the busiest train station in the Netherlands is not Amsterdam. Amsterdam is too far west. So the busiest train station in the Netherlands is actually Utrecht. It's the 4th largest city in the country, but it's farther east of the biggest cities in Holland, like Holland, the region, not the country. So it's in effect the interface between Holland and the rest of the Netherlands. So they did a rebuild last decade where they massively simplified the station. So they made the station much less flexible. So for example, one of the things that they did is they reduced the number of switches for turnouts. And I'm going to share screen, not of the model, but of a 2D version of the model, the 2D blueprint that turned that 3D artist Emily Compton turned into this playable model. So if I do this, So this is an SVG, it just lives on my computer, but there are PNGs that I will link to. So platforms 1 through 8. And I hope that people don't mind the very loud color scheme, but this magenta is the platform, and this dark yellow is the kind of the track, is the tracks, so to speak. So this thing where one track splits into two is called a switch or a turnout. There are more than these. There's going to have to be more than like these depicted, but not that many more. In Utrecht, they went from 200 of these to 70. They cut 2/3 of the turnout. They made the system much more rigid, less flexible, but that made it better because at Utrecht, the train frequency is so high that you can change trains pretty easily. And the turnouts are very failure prone. So they made the system much more reliable. So maybe it's less resilient if something fails, but instead they chose to do things so that things will not fail. The other thing is, because these are so wide platforms, it's much easier to unload an entire train and have people get to these walkways or the street very, very quickly. It's not like I can time it because it's not like I can tell you how much. It's not like I can tell you how much in practice it is observed to be at a train station that doesn't exist, but I can use the usual figures that are used when doing this design engineering, and you can unload a full train in about 1:20. A full train, like a 12-car train where all the seats are filled and there are a lot of standees, would be able to unload in practice in rush hour conditions in 1:20. So much faster egress. The speed through the throat would be much faster. Today, the trains are limited to 15 miles an hour. I believe this is 50 kilometer an hour, so 30 miles an hour design, which doesn't look like a big difference, but the amount of saving coming from doing it this way, so here it would be 50 kilometers an hour, I think here it's 70 or 80, is probably comparable to what you're getting from going from 135 to 160 over most of the state of New Jersey.
In that Dutch example, did they alter the number of tracks or platforms, or just
no? They didn't. They didn't change the platforms, but they removed some pass-through tracks. So at the time, they had some tracks that didn't even stop at the station. I think they were for some bypassing freight trains, and they removed them just because, again, all the infrastructure required to get to them was so failure prone. Switches are maintenance intensive and they're failure prone. That they that it was making the system better to just not have that. Yeah, so the car, thanks the car. So with the extra island platform that they added, was that based on new tracks that they were building, or is that existing tracks that were passed through? That's what I don't know, because I knew that they eliminated the pass through tracks, but
okay, it's fine. I was just
just asking someone in chat who's nitpicking me about something that is very correct.
So did you want to open this to questions from viewers?
Yeah, I mean, unless you have questions for me that you think I need to address first.
Part of the discussion is there should be through running, and that means different things to different people. One concept is you would get on a train in New Jersey and take that train to Long Island. Now, there may be some people who want to do that, but maybe most of the people who are in New Jersey actually want to go to Manhattan, particularly in the morning. And maybe only a handful want to go through to Queens or Long Island. The other piece of that was going back to what's called the Access to the Region's Core Plan, where New York and New Jersey and the Port Authority, without Amtrak, came up with an initial plan to build 2 new tubes under the river, bring them into Penn Station, and then continue those tracks to connect to Grand Central, which is a kind of through running. It gives people in New Jersey a second option in Manhattan to get to East Midtown. But what happened 20 years ago was that there was rivalry between the constituent railroads. Metro North didn't want New Jersey coming in, and Long Island wanted this and that, and Amtrak. And the four, we've written in the Daily News, the four railroads are acting like private corporations, elbowing out their competitors when in fact they're all government agencies. And two of them are actually siblings within the MTA system. But even though two of them are under the same authority, Metro North and Long Island, they still couldn't get them to cooperate to share Grand Central. And the East Side access necessitated building a cavern under Park Avenue, an extra $10 billion, extra 10 years for East Side access. And so the whole concept of through running has different meanings to different people. But I think in general, the concept is the trains don't dead end. And
Exactly.
as what the plan that Chris Christie killed was for a ARC station underneath Macy's basement, which was a dead end. Trains are going to come in, stop, and back to New Jersey. The current plan for what's called 780 or Penn expansion, now $17 billion from Amtrak, is the trains come in from New Jersey, they stop, they don't hit the wall, and then they back them out to New Jersey instead of going somewhere else, instead of going to Queens, Long Island, or to Grand Central. Anyways, just on the terminology of through running, because it means different things. And Andy Byford.
Oh, I was very happy to see Andy Byford speak. I was very happy when Andy Byford, was that a month ago? It was an event at a group that we're going to address in a moment, because we've gotten questions about them in the Q&A already, and a lot of them I know are here. But it's a group called Rethink NYC, which has its own through running proposal. He spoke at their forum and essentially spoke in favor of through running and against this at the time 13, now $17 billion worth of Penn expansion. So by the way, to your point about on most people wanting to go to Manhattan, as I said, it's something that we're working on, the Effective Transit Alliance. So I actually have a graphic for you which is from just before the pandemic, and it is this one. This is the URL. I'm going to post it in chat in one moment, but if you look at all of these combined, there's actually a fair amount of commuting that would go through Manhattan. Now, to not make it sound like I'm proposing something where for one quick fix you can get 3 million more people on the trains per day, a lot of these would not really be through running at Penn Station. So things like New Jersey to Brooklyn, I mean, right now Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn is a stub end. If you want to through run things to Brooklyn, you need to punch an entirely new tunnel. We're not talking about gateway, we're talking about something about an entirely new tunnel. It would be about, I think, 8 or 9 kilometers from here. With the LIR, it's not very good. This map is intended to show volume, so intended to show trains, but the trains go here. So imagine a new tunnel under downtown Brooklyn, lower Manhattan, the Jersey City waterfront. Yeah, that's going to be expensive, but that's how you're getting this volume, for example. But a lot of these volumes don't. Like, I mean, Jersey to Long Island is real. Jersey to Queens. I mean, you do this kind of through running, and you can hit. So right now there's no station at Sunnyside, but there are plans to build one in the future, and that's actually pretty close to Long Island City jobs. There's Flushing, Jamaica, maybe with the service with the airport. You keep going on this line to the Northeast Corridor. You get to, maybe you don't get to the main job centers in the Bronx, but you get to some of them. You go on to Connecticut for Greenwich, Stamford, New Haven. And on the way back, you go to Jersey and you get to job centers like Newark. Newark is a real job center. So this is actually a pretty decent market for through running. And with the other issue, it's this. It's a very short thing that we wrote at ETA about through running. We're gonna write a much longer one, and by gonna write, I mean, the current draft has 19,000 words. It will be released any moment now. By the way, hi, Elif. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
So, no, it's fine. Always late to things. So people are asking questions in the Q&A, and I would like to start answering some of them, or Eric, Michael, Ellie, if you can take some of them too, if you would like.
Okay.
Actually, I'd like to take the question from Michael Shaker or myself. So would my proposed layout work with the proposed reconstruction of the original Penn station? The answer is that I don't know. So the reconstruction of the original, at least the way I think of it, is an above ground thing to rebuild that structure. And you can't do the exact same thing without doing the exact same columns. The columns are from before the demolition of the original station and the construction of the new one and MSG and Penn Plaza. You could do something very similar though, something that would look kind of neoclassical, with very tall, with very not tall, very high ceilings and so on. This is absolutely possible. Again, it would look a little bit different, mostly because the current track 1 and 21, my proposals, tracks 1A and 8B, they are not underneath the block, they're underneath the street. The southernmost, the retaining walls are at the center points of 31st and 33rd Street, so it's going to be a little bit hairy to build the exact same thing if you don't want a lot of columns, but you can build something that looks like the exact thing. Like, I don't think people want the exact same thing with the exact same luxury 1910s 20s restaurants. They want something pretty neoclassical, I think, when they do that, if that makes sense.
For what they would put above it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. There's been a couple questions there. Could through running work without removing the garden, without removing Penn, with keeping the 21 tracks that are there now and number of platforms? I mean, your scenario is like, if you can get a clean slate, remove the garden, remove 2, open it up, we can make it 100% efficient. If that can't happen because the garden won't move, or Penn doesn't move, or whatever reason, just in terms of on the current infrastructure, could something be done to allow for this and to abrogate the need for Penn expansion?
So about abrogating the need for Penn expansion, so a lot of through running proponents will tell you that through running is better than Penn expansion because it gives you much better service at a lower cost. I agree, but it would also tell you that you don't need Penn expansion even without through running. And a lot of people in chat are asking, what if there is no what if there is no through running? So an anonymous attendee is asking, is the proposed Penn model capable of supporting the current terminal style rail service if there is no immediate through running? And the answer is actually, to a large extent, yes. So because, as I said before, one of the things the model does is it vastly simplifies operations, and in response to another question, it does mean that trains will always arrive at the same platform. So this is one of the things that this is what Laszlo Kitz was asking. So so if you play the 3D model a little bit, it doesn't say exactly where each track goes because some of it is up in the air, which branches connect to which branches, but there are hints. For example, platform 1 is the one that says you go to Grand Central. So platforms 1 and 2 would be, platform 1 is eastbound, platform 2 is westbound. The platforms that always connect the new tunnel, the Hudson Tunnel project that's under construction, to a future connection, we think to Grand Central, but if it turns out to be too difficult, it could be 2 more tunnels to Long Island, for example. And the result is that even terminal operations would be a lot simpler, a lot easier. Right now, one of the problems with the terminal operations is that Penn Station has 21 tracks. an inbound train from New Jersey can't use all 21, but it can use almost all of them. I never remember. I think it can use the bottom 16 or 17 tracks. So if if a New Jersey Transit train comes back to Jersey from Penn Station, it can potentially conflict with many different inbound trains because it could be conflicting with trains crossing almost the entire station throat. And if instead you localize this to just platforms 1 and 2 for us, tracks 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, then essentially there are only going to be 4 tracks where there could be conflicts, so things could be much smoother, much less delay prone. And what this means is that even without the running, I don't think you can get the same capacity, the same throughput as with the running, but you could get fairly close. So again, you're still leaving a lot of value on the table because of that map and all those through commutes, and it's less efficient, but you absolutely could be running a lot of frequency through that. And the same is true with platforms 7 and 8 with LA or R things, which essentially can only run to one place, which is the Empire connection. Would need to be rebuilt with a short tunnel, but short tunnel, no stations, is not actually that expensive.
Just wanted to point something out, that the reason that they were looking at ARC and why they started it and Christie killed it, and then they're looking at Gateway, is 1 hour, actually 2 hours a day out of a 24-hour day. Even though the railroads don't run 24 hours, it is the busiest inbound morning peak hour and the busiest PM. And everyone recognizes that has changed radically and permanently since 2019. Not that just transit ridership is at 2/3 of its level overall. Peak transit ridership is probably not even half of what it was. And the MTA and the Port Authority, they never report that. They simply say, well, we're at 68% of ridership. That's overall. If you look down deeply,
it's mostly the peak that's that, but bear in mind,
because people are traveling on Saturdays, they're traveling on Sundays, they're traveling middle of the day, which is fine. There's plenty of capacity in the system for all of that travel. So the question is, how many trains per hour? Now, New Jersey Transit had a plan years ago. They wanted 50 trains per hour to come into Manhattan. That's nonsense. You don't need 50 trains with 1,000 people on them all to arrive at the same hour at 8 a.m. because everyone has to be at their desk at 9 a.m. Things have shifted. People are coming in later. They're coming in different times. And to spend all this money to rip up all this big section of Manhattan, because at some point they may want to run 50 trains per hour. Right now, the Long Island Railroad can run, using 4 tubes, 36 trains easily into Manhattan per hour. They can actually get that up to 42. There's no reason that if 2 new tubes are built on the Hudson side, New Jersey Transit and Amtrak can't replicate it. They could do 36 or 40 trains per hour. You can't really get to 50. If you want to get to 50, you're going to have to start tearing down chunks of Manhattan. But no one's asking. These projections were all made 20 or 30 years ago. They thought that growth would just continue and continue for the peak hour, and it hasn't. Even before the pandemic, the peak hour ridership was not reaching those projections. And since COVID, and even though we're post-COVID, since the work from home evolution, the need that everyone needs to be there at 9 o'clock when these systems were designed, in the 1920s or 30s or 50s, is gone. And they are, just like Amtrak is refusing to look at new technologies, from repair in place to not needing bench walls, which they're insisting on for their Hudson tubes, which no one else in the world is building bench walls anymore. It's a 1910 technology. Amtrak wants to do it because all they have is a 1910 manual. Likewise, they're still stuck saying the commuting patterns of the 1960s will continue and grow. And so there was someone noting on the chat, how about non-peak and non-direction? There's plenty of room, and you could add service. You could add service shuttling people in and out of New York during those times. The question is, it's the peak. So just, again, everything comes down to Amtrak, New Jersey Transit. What can't they do? Well, they can't run more trains at the peak of rush hour. Okay, but can you run trains at other times? And that's not what they focus on. They're working with the big construction international firms that you identified in your transit cost reports, STV, AECOM, Parsons. Those are the consultants who map this out. They then bid on the contracts. They manage the things. They're receiving billions. The construction unions, God bless them, are all supporting this work because they're getting the money. The politician is looking at a 2-year window for his reelection, and we are putting our money into projects in a crazy fashion. Why are we spending? If these were private companies, the way they behave, if it was private capital, they wouldn't be doing this. They'd be trying to look for what's the most efficient way to do things, what's the most cost effective, what is the most economical.
Yeah, there's something that we don't have the exact reference in the report, in the ETA report that I just linked to. It's in the long one. We say in the short one that the proportion of people entering the Manhattan core, so that's Manhattan south of 60th Street, who on a weekday, not weekend, enter it between 8 and 9 in the morning, it fell from 25% in 1960 to 16% in 2019. There's actually, even before the pandemic, on the eve of the pandemic, there was less.
It was dipping, right?
Yeah, there was less rush hour commuting into the Manhattan core than there had been in the 50s and 60s. There was more overall commuting, but more than 100% of the growth is off peak. Now in Jersey, I think they eventually will need more capacity just because Jersey is building more housing. Long Island doesn't, but Jersey does build more housing. So I think eventually something like HTP is going to be necessary. Like I don't think HTP, I think HTP is poorly designed in many ways, and Michael has gone over a lot of the design problems. I don't think it's inherently a bad project the way something like Penn expansion.
No, and there are people talking, do we need 2 tubes? Could you do it with 1? So during
like the thing with 1 tube is that and I know that Joe Clift was pushing that is in chat. I'm gonna answer your question in a sec. So the thing with doing it with 1 tube is if you have 3 tracks, you can't run symmetric service, and a lot of and because of this issue of frequency, actually, the really important thing is to have frequency that is high all day, so not just at rush hour, and very consistent. So right now, if I were to show you, I'm not gonna do it, but if I were to show you the timetables for New Jersey Transit, LIRR, Metro North commuter trains, generally they run 4 times as much frequency at rush hour as midday. It's a 4-to-1 ratio. It's really inefficient. Nearly all of the costs, not all of them, nearly all of them are just about how much service you run at rush hour. For example, if you're buying the train set, or if you're building the extra tunnels, you're doing all this capital work.
And off of rush hour, you have to, like, you miss a train, you have to wait an hour for the next train.
Yeah, exactly. And like normally, so I live in Berlin, which has atypically low ratios. Much of the city is 1-to-1, so same service, not quite start to end. It's same service. Let's say 6 or 7 in the morning to 9 or 10 in the evening, and yeah, they run less at 11 at night, but that's not critical. And so if you do something like 1.5-to-1 or 2-to-1, that means you need to figure out how you're going to run a train every 10 minutes out to, let's say, Stamford on the local tracks, and then some more on the express track. Are you going to run a train every 10 minutes all day to White Plains? Are you going to run a train every 10 minutes to the Amboys? How are you going to run a local train every 10 minutes to a place like Brunswick? So a lot of that is, and bear in mind, again, I'm talking about in some places we're talking tripling off-peak frequency. The cost is not, the operating costs are not even going to be that high, but conversely, it also means you probably can't run service very asymmetrically. If things are very symmetric, triple track is very weak. It's one of those 2 or 4, never 3 things. You can, in small cases, you might be able to triple track, but this is why I'm skeptical of triple track in general. And yeah, so okay, all right. There are a bunch of people asking questions, and because I have all the time in the world, but not everyone else does, I'd like to start talking about them in order. So actually, I think Michael, did you see Matthew Robinson's question in the Q&A about all the repairs and have they gotten worse? Because this is something that I know far less than you do.
This is under the Hudson River. They had a report called the interim reliability report. They are constantly down there, but basically they are patching it, and they are saying that Amtrak, you'll still need to, whenever the Hudson tubes are built, probably 2 of them, and they're done in 10 years, they want to close down the 1910 tubes and strip them bare and rebuild them. And what the London Bridge report said, all permanent repairs can be achieved nights and weekends. So the difference is, if you're in there, get rid of the bench walls or put the cables on the racks like they do everywhere else in the world, like they do in Britain. They just did in the Crossrail, which is now the the Elizabeth line, excuse me. So Amtrak is doing some work just to make sure that there's no additional damage, but they are not doing the permanent work, and they are waiting till the new tubes are built so they can then shutter the old ones, which seems crazy because they constantly say the tubes are in danger of failing. So, okay, fix them now. Don't wait, 15 years. But again, they're back to their 1910 mentality.
Yeah, the danger of failing line has always stricken me as kind of odd, given that everything else is like behavior, like they need the capacity, which again I think they will eventually, but it's not what you do when things are imminently failing. Anyway, Lynn, thank you for the question. So you're asking how this proposal differs from Rethink and Tri-State. The answer is in a bunch of ways. So first of all, I have not shown you a map of which lines go to which lines, and this is very much on purpose. The reason is that, as I said, we're at the TLU program, we're working on figuring out timetables for this. So things like, how can regional and intercity trains share the same tracks at different speeds? This involves things with timed overtakes, and the work on this is rather difficult. And this means that there might be, so I do not want to commit to things that might need to change drastically in the future. So I can say things like, I think that they can build this connection between platforms 1 and 2. Currently it's tracks 1 through 4 or 1 through 5 of Penn Station under 31st Street. And turn that into instead of dead end, just dig under 31st and then go north toward Grand Central and thread between the tunnel of the 6 train and the tunnel of the 7 train. It's not completely trivial. I think it is doable. And so, for example, I think that this is possible, and because admittedly it's difficult, Rethink is more skeptical and just wants extra tracks to Long Island, to Sunnyside. But again, I am deliberately refusing to commit to a specific pattern. The train station in the 3D model would essentially look the same if you do Rethinks through running, I think. You just have different, the signage would be different because the destinations would be different, but it would substantially be the same. If there's time, I would like to later go over a more subtle difference, but there are a lot of other questions. So an anonymous entity is also asking about the operating model, which trains would use which tracks. So yeah, so because people are asking, I'm gonna share screen for a moment and go back to the 2D version of the model, just because it's only top down. So with this model, So platforms go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Platforms 1 and 2 are paired. They go from the new tunnels, so HTP, that's where roughly they would land. Current plan is to have them curve farther south. I think it's south of these columns. And then hit, this is block, sorry, not this. This is block 780. So have them hit here, but you can just go on the other side of some columns and go here. And then east, they, again, I think they should curve to Grand Central, but if it's too difficult, they could go somewhere else. They could go to Grand Central, but not Grand Central lower level for Metro North, but the deep Grand Central, the one for East Side access, Grand Central Madison, then connect to Long Island, or they could just go under the East River and go to Long Island from there. Tracks, I'm going to skip platforms 3, 4, 5, 6 from 7 and 8 because you were asking about the Empire connection. This is, so right now there are 4 tracks between Penn Station and Long Island, 232nd Street, which go westbound, eastbound, and then 233rd Street, which also go westbound, eastbound. They don't go like directional. So this would connect some LRR trains to this, and it's drawn as a stub, and it's not actually a stub, and these can continue to a realigned Empire connection. Right now the Empire connection hits the station around here, about this part of the station, but they could again realign it as a short tunnel, but without stations, so it's not the end of the world to build that. So that would be that running. 3, 4, 5, 6 would be the old tunnels of the North River tunnels to the 32nd Street tunnels. So the way we've drawn it is that 5 and 6 are intercity, 4 and 5 are intercity, 3 and 6 are commuter. If you really want, you can even build separate high-speed rail tunnels underneath this or something. It's going to be annoyingly difficult, I think possible, but it's a little bit of future proofing if you were building 10,000 miles of high-speed rail throughout America and suddenly you need the separation, but the plan is initially not to do that. So this is the kind of throwing plan. And the point is that every train, based on where it goes, you know exactly which platform to stand on. Maybe the tracks might change, but it's the same platform. It's the idea that one approach track turns into 2 platform tracks facing the same platform is something that I constantly see in Berlin, Stuttgart. It's how modern planning is done, if that makes sense. Anything that you'd like to add? Again, I'm just going to keep going through the questions. You said you need to drop in like 3 minutes, right?
I'm fine. I can go past. I don't know if Eric had to attend to something else. This, of course, calls for cooperation between the railroads, and right now these railroads don't cooperate on anything. We've shown how they won't cooperate on building a new station. They're Grand Central or Penn Station. They don't even cooperate on using the same cleaning services at Penn Station. There's 3 different contracts: one to clean the Jersey Transit area, one to clean the Long Island area, one to clean the Amtrak area. There are different sets of signage. You wouldn't even know if you're in the Long Island area that you could take a New Jersey train. There's different police forces. Amtrak police patrols the Amtrak area and New Jersey Transit. Metro North police patrol Long Island, and it used to be the NYPD took care of the 2 subway stations. No, that's changed. It has gone to MTA police. So the railroads all are operating their separate fiefdoms, and to have this cooperation for a through running or to go to Grand Central, they would have to cooperate. And unfortunately, they don't. And, we've used the example of Union Station. Well, Union Station in Washington and Chicago is not because of Abe Lincoln or the Union Army. It's because the station was not built for one railroad, like the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was a shared facility in Washington. And so Penn Station.
Or Boston too. Boston South Station is a Union Station of 4 different railroads, of which 3 ended up merging immediately.
Right. And so Penn Station, it's owned by Amtrak. Unfortunately, Amtrak is the least open to innovation. They are the least able to really do anything. They have about 5% of the passengers in Penn Station, about 5% of the trains, 95% of the people using Penn Station on the railroads or in subways, obviously, are not on Amtrak. And yet Amtrak is the proprietor. Amtrak decides what's happening. Amtrak is the one that doesn't want New Jersey Transit there anymore. And Amtrak is pushing to basically exile New Jersey Transit, force a divorce, and kick New Jersey Transit to 780. For years, New Jersey Transit refused to, repair its part of Penn Station. Their attitude is, we're not staying. We're going to Macy's basement. Their attitude now is, we're not staying. We're going to Block 780. Well, a lot of people hope they don't go to Block 780, in which case, fix what you have now, rationalize it. Two of the platforms only accommodate 8 or 9 car trains, 1 to 4. Everything else does 12 cars at least. That is something that has been on the drawing board for decades. People in New Jersey can't access the tracks. The entrance at Moynihan at the Farley Post Office. Some of those people are New Yorkers coming in from west of Hudson. New York State built and paid for Moynihan, and these New Yorkers can't even use the station. So the railroads, they all have their own little plans. They're operating in their silos. But when you walk into Penn Station, you want to take a train. You don't care if it's Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, Metro North or Long Island or at some point Metro North. You just want to take a train to New Brunswick or Stamford or Washington or New York or Chicago. And the railroad operating companies are just so resistant. And the only way it's going to change is if the political players above them, the governors of 2 states, Amtrak is tougher because it's federal, to tell these railroad companies, you work for the public, you're public agencies. You have to behave in the public interest instead of your direct interest. Anyways, you want to go through a few more of those comments on the chat?
Yep. Yeah, and just to add to what you said, these railroads fight a lot of turf battles, but it's kind of silly given that fundamentally they all get funding from the same place. It's not like one of them is getting federal funding, the other exclusively gets New Jersey state funding, the other exclusively New York funding, and the fourth one maybe is a private railroad that gets money exclusively from its own investors. Now, these all live off of federal grants, and the FRA could be, I think, requiring more coordination. Okay, Lynn, you ask whether one of the points of through running is not just a pure efficiency move, but also to change commuting patterns over time and redistribute economic opportunity. Yes, but often not in the way people think about this. So, and this is something I forget if I wrote this in an email to Sam Turvey earlier today, but one of the things that I keep kind of actuallying people about, and kind of this might blow your mind, is that at a scale of, let's say, 100 square kilometers. Why 100 square kilometers? Because that's an approximate area of Paris. Paris actually has more job centralization in the city than New York. The proportion of Metro Paris jobs that are in the city or in La Défense is about 37. And if you take the exact same surface area in New York and try to do things like the Manhattan core, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, and so on, and try to stretch it, I think you get to only 35%. So obviously Paris doesn't look anything like New York on this. In Paris, neighborhoods that are just outside city center, let's say the equivalent of the Upper East Side, Upper West Side, would have way more job centers. And one of the things that you could do with Thorning is never going to weaken city center because it's still city center. But it would, what it would do on commuting patterns, it would encourage the growth of these secondary centers, which are very common in Paris. They could be on top of RER stations in the city. They could be on top of RER stations in the inner suburbs. So in New York, there would be even more growth in Long Island City, towards Sunnyside, more in downtown Newark. If you do the Penn to Grand Central connection, It would accelerate the construction of commercial and cultural centers in East Harlem. It would be more growth in Jamaica and Flushing. Flushing is already a giant destination, not necessarily, I mean, partly for jobs, but not just for jobs. And Flushing before Corona was the busiest subway station in New York outside Manhattan. I think it's still close second. So that would be what the running would do on redistributing economic opportunity. It would make it easier for people from more places to get to more places, but the latter more places, the destinations would probably they're not going to be very evenly distributed. They're going to be mostly things that are maybe not in Manhattan because that's already accessible, but things that are near Manhattan. So again, the Newarks, the Sunnysides, the Flushings, maybe farther out in the suburbs, all these office parks in central Jersey. They might stay, but if they build a new corporate HQ, they might choose to do it in downtown New Brunswick or near the Metro Park station. Do I want to take more questions? Let's say yes. Okay, so I'm just going to go in order. Okay, so Laszlo, you're asking, or you're commenting that the 3 local train systems should be brought under one system. They don't need to. So we have this thing, we have this German word. One of the things that the joke is there's always a German word for it. The German word is called Verkehrsverbund, and I'm going to actually type it in chat because it is
right.
Verkehrsverbund, and it's going to take me multiple try to not have typo. So it's called a Verkehrsverbund, which means transport association. What it means is that in Germany, the norm is that if there's a subway system or or a streetcar system or whatever, it's probably going to be run by a municipal agency. But then the commuter trains, at least historically, were run by the National Railroad. So then maybe municipal agencies in the suburbs would have something called the Transport Association, where they would work on shared fares and shared schedules. And sometimes, I actually don't know if it exists in Germany, but in Paris it exists, that they have through running between lines that are run by RATP, the agency that runs the metro, and lines that are run by SNCF, the National Railroad. They actually have through running between different agencies. So what they do is they don't merge. They have their own crews, their own management, their own maintenance, often also their own rolling stock, but then they would swap for service. And so they coordinate the fares, they coordinate the schedules. So in Berlin, there's a station in East Berlin where you have a cross-platform transfer, and it's timed between the subway and the commuter trains. They're run by 2 separate agencies, but they worked out the timetables so that it would be cross-platform. So this is what is needed. It's this kind of transport association. It's something that's very common in the German-speaking world. Again, Paris, the metro area of Paris has one. It's spreading through the rest of Europe just because of its success. Generally, if Germany is good at something, the rest of Europe will learn from it.
And Amtrak doesn't learn from anyone. So
Amtrak, there's a problem where Americans have difficulties learning from people who are not American, especially if their native language is not English. So we've seen a lot of reforms that are proposed to be more like London. London does a lot of things very well, like it's nice that the Elizabeth line opened. London also has the highest construction costs in Europe, for example. Everything that speaks English natively has very high construction costs.
But they're still lower than the US.
Oh, lower than the US, of course. But the thing is, often the stuff that people are trying to learn from London is not the stuff that's cheap, but the stuff that's expensive. It's stuff like these global consultancies. These are British and American consultancies where someone could have experience in a lot of different cities, but all of these cities are going to be very inefficient, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Toronto, Melbourne, maybe Sydney, London, New York, and I just named to you 7 cities that are, I think, in the top 10 or 12 most expensive in the world. And so a lot of it is just learning from the right places, which is places where it's kind of done by the German state, the Italian state. One of the things
But the point is that they could do something in New York where they could
Exactly.
keep their individual identity and just cooperate efficiently.
Yeah. Also, okay, so David, I do not know if your last name is pronounced Brissett or Brissant. So David, you're asking if the new above ground Penn station were built before Throning, would it be possible to implement Throning? The answer is always yes, because remember that Throning does not require the 3D model. The 3D model that I just showed you is a way to make it more efficient. I want to say that it cuts about a minute on each side of Penn station from the trip times. But I will know the exact thing to the second in probably about a year. It makes things a lot more reliable, but you could run through the existing station. In fact, again, as soon as Penn Station access opens, the project to run Metro North trains on the New Haven line through the line that currently only Amtrak uses to get to Penn Station, they could just throw it to Jersey. It's something that could be done with the existing platform. So the question is, could you build the wide platform we're proposing? The answer is yes, but it's going to be more difficult if they don't move the columns first. They could move the columns as part of this, but if they don't, it's going to be more difficult modification. Yeah, let me see if other people have. Okay. Oh, Joe, you have another question. You're telling me to talk about the problem with the HTTP design. Yeah. So Joe is pointing out that the current HTTP has this issue where the HTTP is south of, so it starts south of the existing tunnel, but then needs to somehow transition to a 4-track northeast corridor. Yeah, this is where they're going to need a flying junction. But anyway, flying junctions don't cost infinity dollars, but I've seen some cost estimates of flying junctions elsewhere that are, I don't know, low to mid 9 figures. This is a problem. This is a problem, but again, it's not an end of the world problem, if that makes sense. It's annoying.
I think what the point was that.
But Michael, you know Joe better than me.
Right. Well, the northeast corridor is 2 tracks. You know, one north, one south, one east, one west, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
So if you're going to double capacity, you have 2 ways to do it. You could add 1 track on the north side and 1 track on the south side and double capacity. The other way to do it is you build a separate parallel railroad to the south. And that's what they're doing. And the problem with that is it is going to mean that there's going to be, you have to build everything south along the way. So at the Hackensack River, they're going to have to build what's a second bridge called the Portal South Bridge. You're going to have to build where it meets the Hoboken trains, Secaucus Junction. You're going to have to build a Secaucus South. And they currently are planning to bring that into Manhattan and not go to Penn Station, but go to Penn South. And you add up Penn South, 17 billion, you add up Secaucus South, $1 billion or 2, Portal South, and it's many, many billions or tens of billions of dollars. Whereas if you add 1 track to the south and 1 track to the north, you can save all those additional infrastructure costs. And the 2 new tubes will come into Penn Station proper. But of course, Amtrak and New Jersey Transit don't want to share. They want to separate. They want the divorce. They want each other. Each one wants its marquee station, whether for pride or for whatever it means. So the current plan is in the New Jersey side, when the tunnel comes out from under the river, it is currently being designed that both new tubes are going to be south of the existing northeast corridor. And the point is, if you want to really make it as efficient as you can, one of those new tubes should actually tuck under or go over the northeast corridor and be one above, excuse my hands, one above the corridor, one below the corridor, with a corridor in between, instead of both below. And because they are eager to have press releases or whatever they want, the appearance of progress on this project, they are moving forward to awarding contracts for that Palisade contract in New Jersey. It's not really the tunnel it's under the river, but it's where the tunnel comes up on the land side. The big issue is also where the tunnel comes up on the New York side, and if it planned for 780. One quick thing. You would think when the new tubes open, you'll have 4 tubes right away. Well, then they're going to close one of the 1910 tubes. Okay, so now you have 3. And therefore, you have 3 tubes, 50% more traffic. Nope, says Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. Our capacity will remain the same, even with 3 tubes. Why? Because the 2 new tubes are really designed for Penn South. And there is a ladder, there is a connection of switches into Penn Station, but they are inefficient. And you can't get trains to move there in a smooth manner. So
wait, Michael, I'm gonna, you can keep talking, but I'm gonna share a screen because there's a map of this in open rail map.
Right. So
this is
those
existing. This
3
is
tubes. 3 tubes will basically do the work of 2.
Yep.
But if the 2 new tubes came into Penn proper, you could actually start increasing capacity immediately. And obviously, if you repaired the old ones in place, which they should do, you could basically double capacity upon the opening of the Hudson Tunnel in 10 years, instead of waiting for all the components of Gateway, $50 billion to be constructed, which is going to be what, 2099 or beyond. Yeah. So that's kind of where we started. Is 780 needed? God bless you, or Gesundheit if we're using German words. Is 780 needed? Well, it's needed for Amtrak if you want to kick New Jersey Transit out. It's needed by New Jersey Transit if you want your own palace in Manhattan. It's needed by STV and AECOM if you want to, spend 15 or 18 billion dollars of the public monies. It's needed by the construction unions if you want to get contracts and workers for $17 billion worth of work. Is it needed for passengers? No. Is it needed for people who live in that area who's going to have their neighborhood demolished? No. Is it needed for the taxpayers of New York or New Jersey? You have to pay for this? No. Anyway, you want to keep going through that? Any more to address?
I mean, remember, despite the fact that I am 6 hours east of you, I also have no other constraints today. So I've done these things where I take questions for hours. I don't know if I have hours, but I have time. So
we'll see if anyone keeps watching after hours.
Yeah. So Stephen Marman is asking is pointing out that Amtrak runs through Penn Station already. Penn Station is not a pure terminal the way, let's say, South Station or Grand Central. Yeah, exactly. So the question is, can Amtrak's through running service, could it be accommodating using the existing tracks and platforms, using the new tunnels? And I think the answer is yes, but very difficultly, as you just explained. The ladder at that's where I'm going to share screen on something that's not the most optimal.
Amtrak is not planning to use the newly built infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. Because the tunnels are coming around.
Use my hands. They're pushing New Jersey Transit out of the Northeast Corridor. Yep. They're pushing New Jersey Transit to Portal South Bridge, to Secaucus South, to the new tubes, and to Penn South. They want. Yeah,
they can do. Yeah, so they're trying to go here, and I'm just saying that they should go here, but that's still, if the new tunnels are not really going to have Amtrak in them. And honestly, I think it's fine. Like, I think that it's okay to say that. I don't like the agency separation. I don't think it's right to do Amtrak tunnels and New Jersey Transit tunnels. That's kind of bullshit. But I think it's okay. It actually is good for a lot of things to say that, let's say, the old tunnels take all the Northeast corridor traffic, including all the branches like the New Jersey coastline, and then the new tunnels take, let's say, the Morris and Essex lines. So that's, I keep doing a lot of screen share. So Northeast corridor is this, and this is the North Jersey coastline, and then this is called this system is called the Morris and Essex line. Right. Arguably, this also fits into the same thing, and that makes everything just much easier to accommodate. But it also means that you can't run intercities through the new tunnels. And again, honestly, that's fine. Like it's fine to have a more rigid system where it's not infinitely flexible. But what you want is not to have these agency turf battles. Okay. Okay, so Zul Zolkowitz is asking, is asking us to describe the grandest vision of what this might be in terms of cutting edge technology and transportation, and what it means for a greener, pedestrian friendly city. And the answer is that I honestly don't know, because green can mean very different things to very different people. It also, it's a question like, okay, for example, how much do you want New York City to grow? So one of the things I keep thinking about with growth, and I keep telling it to Berlin Greens, and they keep slagging on me for this, is that in Germany, the average per capita greenhouse gas emissions, it's about 9 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And in Berlin, it's about 5. And in New York, in America, I think in America, in New York, the corresponding numbers are maybe 15 or 16 and 7. So again, the biggest city is much greater than the rest of the country. So you probably want to make it
people
easier
are
for
not using private cars, right?
Exactly. And not using private cars. They live in apartment buildings, so the inefficiency of heating means that whenever there's inefficient heating in my apartment, most of the inefficiency heats up all the apartments around mine, rather than just the street. And so you kind of want to grow the city, so that means making sure that, and it's something I think better public transit would help. It would encourage more job growth in the city, near train stations, rather than either at office parks that can only be accessed by car, or sometimes corporations that realize that they can't expand their HQs in New York or Bay Area or even downtown or the Chicago Loop. Often they don't even move to a nearby office park. They build many satellite offices in very low cost parts of the country. So there's this kind of breaking of the link between the main HQ and the big, rich, constrained city center, and a lot of subsidiary offices are very far away. And often there's a culture where if you stay in that office, you will never get promoted beyond it. You'll never get promoted beyond a certain point. So it's something it kind of looks like it spreads work around the country, but what it actually does is it keeps the workers who are not deemed to be important enough for the main HQ, it keeps them very far away. So it's not actually as egalitarian as you might think. And of course, all of these office parks, they are accessible exclusively by car, and people who work at these office parks live in probably single family houses in areas where everything is done by car. So often greenness just means making it possible to have more growth in the city, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, anytime people are on trains, it's more efficient and less polluting. I think there's something, I mean, I have to go at some point, but there's one question there you may want to address. It's the preloading.
Yep.
That the way Penn Station works now is they don't call trains until very shortly before. So they announce it and everyone runs to the train, and then a few minutes later the train leaves. And if you were having this type of want trains in and out quickly, how would that work? I mean, I don't know if it would need to be that much different, because trains in here's an example. I've heard that a Long Island train will come in with 1,000 people, takes about 2 minutes to clear the platform. There are 5 vertical access points. A New Jersey train will come in, take 5 minutes. Why? 2 vertical access points. So part of the Penn reconstruction plans are to add more vertical access points for those New Jersey tracks, which they've never wanted to do because they always thought they were leaving. This simulation would actually go even further and have, a dozen, I don't know, 6 or 8 vertical access points. But in terms of getting people off and getting people on, how do you do that? Now, a subway platform is very different. The A train everyone's crowded on the platform, train comes in, people jostle, some get in, some get out, and then the train moves out, hopefully quickly. So just want to address that.
Yep. So about the platform issue, this is something that I don't actually know if the 19,000 word report that I sent you a draft of, and that we will release, I hope next week, but I was also hoping to release that in February. So, we actually found loadings, like train loadings, not train, platform loadings in Paris, by time of day, and by individual line. So I could tell you that the number of boardings in the peak 4 hours, that's the resolution that we got, at some of the city center stations, like Gare du Nord, is the busiest, is 50,000. So what this means, so Gare du Nord, and I'm going to do a bit of a screen share and show you an attempt to show you what it's like in Paris. So in Paris, so 6 train terminals: Lyon, Montparnasse, Austerlitz, Saint-Lazare.
I just realized
Est.
I doubt they're showing examples of how it works in New York to people in London, Paris, and Berlin.
No, nobody
unless they're looking for a very inefficient system.
They don't. Like the average. So one of the issues with learning from it is the average European just does not think about the United States, or maybe reads news about Biden or something. That's not. I mean, the average European doesn't think it's important to learn how America does things. Except
there's
again,
nothing,
very
there's
narrow.
nothing to learn from how we are operating
Not
rail
in transit.
to New York.
Not in transit. Yeah. So anyway, so with Gare du Nord, it's maybe not clear on this map because this is mostly surface, but the kind of light orange, this is the RER. So this is the tunnel for lines B and D. B goes here, D goes here to Gare de Lyon, and this is where D goes. So the Gare du Nord platforms, there's 2 platforms, the B and D, I think, are cross-platform, north or south. The number of people getting on the B and the number of people getting on the D each is, I believe, about 50,000 in the peak 4 hours every weekday. So 50,000 people, by which I mean 100,000 because it's a 4-track 2-platform station, get on these trains in a 4-hour rush hour. So now these are very wide platforms, not Penn Station wide platforms. Forget about that at Penn Station. I mean, I'm not saying that Penn Station can't run more frequency, but if you want to be that intense, you need wider platforms. But the point is that you can actually do this kind of jostling with commuter rail if it's very busy. Commuter rail in the United States, I mean, it's busy, but it's not that busy. So New Jersey Transit actually has a lot of crowding, but on pre-corona numbers, the LIRR and Metro North had a lot less crowding than the subway. But okay, so more question. Laszlo is asking, do we think congestion pricing will increase commuter volume? I think that, so Michael, I'm curious, what do you think? And actually,
the answer is yes. And the leaders of the MTA said just a few days ago, we have plenty of capacity. So, the commuter number of people driving in is very small compared to the number of people on trains. And the number of people expected to switch from driving to transit is, pretty minute.
It's there, but it's not huge. But actually, Elif, I'm curious what you think, because I know that you've been studying this a lot for modeling things related to.
But there's plenty of capacity.
Like, what do you think is going to happen with congestion pricing?
I'm not sure really. So far we've looked at so we're looking specifically at like areas around the IBX. In New York, I guess, I mean, what Michael is saying makes sense, and there's not that big of a, most people are already on trains, so but there will be an increase, but maybe not that huge.
Okay, yeah.
I can't back by numbers yet.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of the things that I think you told me that you're studying, but you don't have numbers on that yet, right? Yeah, sorry, I can't tell you. Congestion pricing will increase ridership by exactly 6.8%.
But the leaders of the MTA say they welcome those people. They say there's plenty of capacity.
Yeah.
Rich Davey and Jana Lieber just said that about a week ago.
Okay, so Anthony, so Anthony, I think you pronounce your last name Ciclare, but it might be an Italian thing, which is Ciclare. I'm sorry if I'm getting it wrong. So, about Two Penn Plaza, and yeah, there's going to be some resistance to demolishing, but at the end of the day, it is a 150,000 square meter skyscraper in an area where Vornado is canceling some of its plans. Like there were these plans to fund Penn expansion by levying fees on Vornado to permit it to build skyscrapers all around Penn Station, and Vornado is pulling out of the agreement because they can't finance these skyscrapers. The real estate market, I mean, I'm not saying that it's literally empty buildings. Like I lived in Providence for a year, where the tallest building in the city, it's called the Superman building because it's believed that the Daily Planet building in the comic was based on it. That building was
Where
built
was
in
that?
Providence.
Yeah,
It has a real name, but everyone calls it the Superman building. It's from the 1920s, just to clarify how much recent construction there has been in down city Providence. That building is empty. New York is not like that, but New York is not the strongest office market in the history of mankind right now.
Because the dollars are so tremendously large, tens of billions of dollars. Gateway is going to be $50 billion. Chris Calori, he was hired to run this Gateway program, getting paid very well. I think $400,000 a year for a government job.
It's a nice payment.
Which is the same as the U.S. president. He says every day that Gateway does not move forward, it costs $1 million in extra expense. Okay, let's just say he's right. So that's $365 million a year extra expense you don't build.
Yeah, that means that it's like a $10 billion benefit project if you do 4%, if you do about 4% or 3.6%.
Right.
Rather.
So if you say, well, if you're going to spend, if you're going to spend a year, if you slow everything down for a year to make new plans for through running and to abrogate the need for 780, you've just spent $365 million in extra costs on not building. Granted, but you just saved $15 billion on not doing Penn South 780. So you can weigh it, it's 365 million versus 15 billion. And because the numbers are so large in this, and these are not the projections of, outsiders, these are the projections of the insiders. And wait till they start building it. And then we can go back to the transit cost report that we started with. These are projected costs. If the projected cost is $50 billion for Gateway, and we come back in 50 years when it's done, maybe, what do you think it really ended up costing? 70, 80 billion?
I don't actually. So I will say, like, recently projects in New York have been kind of on budget, just that the budgets are insanely large, but
right. They build it in so big, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like they just, I mean, if you add 50% of the budget just for what ifs, you will probably come on budget, but you still have wasted 50% extra money that you didn't need to often. Wait, okay, so Stephen Smith is asking, what is the view on required improvements in New Jersey? He's asking electrification extension, high platforms, trains that can do multiple voltages. Okay, so about multiple voltages, just for people who don't know, the electrification in on each commuter rail system is different, and I'm going to see if I can actually get. Okay, so I actually can. Sure. So the electrification is this not right, is here. Each system uses different electrification. So the pink is subway electrification. The LR actually has pretty similar electrification to the subway. Metro North is also pretty similar. It's the same color as the subway, but it's actually different. All of this is third rail. LIR and the subway, the shoe is above the third rail. Metro North is below the third rail. So these use the same trains, but you need to change them in the shop. And this is different kinds of high voltage catenary. Thankfully, this is not actually that big of a problem. It's a problem, it's a small one, because like you can see that the New Haven line changes in the middle. So these are dual voltage. Again, there are always some snags, like not all, like the trains generally can't run on everything, but they can do some either light shop modifications or use trains that are being procured right now. For example, the new electric trains at New Jersey Transit is getting can run on all catenary, so they can just go from anywhere here up to here, and it's not a problem. It's a little bit of a modification to get new trains that can do this or this, but it's not a big one. So this is a minor annoyance. Like you had 2 pages in the RFP for the rolling stock for this, and the vendors are used to it, because I'm showing you the thing in New York. Let me see if I can grab London for you. London has an electrified railway network, and different parts of it have different electrification standards. So it's something that the vendors are aware of the existence of. And if you're, in case you're wondering, yes, this is Thameslink. This runs through to this Midlands to south of London. So
That's
this is
the
something that,
north-south, right?
yeah, that's Thameslink, yeah. And then Crossrail, or the Elizabeth line, is east-west. It is this is the main part of it. I don't know if they're showing the tunnel. The tunnel goes roughly like this. And so yeah, it's something that London does, Paris does it. It's something that is a minor annoyance at the end of the day. The other thing, yeah, I mean, you need to. So right now, the
Well, I mean, it's
platforms-
also, you know, the Long Island Railroad and Metro North both use a third rail, but
Yep.
one connects the shoe above the rail
Yep.
and one below.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. So you do, again, it's modifications in the shop. It's all of these things are
Right.
they're work, but they're not a lot of work.
It can be
In
done.
Jersey, Stephen, this is in the 19,000 page report that will be out soon, and even with some cost
19,000 words, I
estimates.
think, right?
Yeah, 19,000 is the current draft.
No, you said
I hope that when
19,000
it's
pages, which sounds like a,
No, it's on 19,000 pages. It's not the environmental analysis for the entire thing. It's the report proposing this. But things like, yeah, I mean, high platforms, they're there, but I mean, much of the work is already being done. I mean, we're talking all of the extra stuff that needs to happen on the surface together. It's single-digit billion, not even high, like probably mid-single-digit billion for literally everything, including various fork trackings that are needed, double trackings that are needed, platforms, electrification, what have you.
now, just when you did the transit report, you spoke to a lot of the transit cost
Yep.
report, the 5 examples.
Yes,
Your
Yep.
team and you were both involved in that, I think. You spoke to a lot of the people who had worked on those projects, right?
of course. Yeah.
Are you having any luck speaking to the people who are planning or working on these proposed gateway and other type thing
A little bit.
proposals?
A little
Okay,
bit.
good.
We actually we talked to some of the people working on Gateway, and essentially they mostly told us the same thing as the people who talked to us about second half and so where there are problems with friction with contractors, friction between the consultants and the client. It's usually it's the same thing. It's why we're pretty confident that a lot of our conclusions about project delivery will work. Okay, so Stephen Marmon is asking, or rather asking, pointing out that NJT and the LRR have multiple lines coming in from each side. So that makes it harder to have high frequency service. I mean, sure, but all commuter rail systems have this kind of branching. So yeah, on the branch, you run every 10, or if it's an outer branch, 20 minutes or 30 or something. Like
Right,
that.
but every New Jersey Transit train that comes in and out of Secaucus, you know, and
yeah, exactly.
And most, you know, then they're either going to Newark Broad or
Newark Penn, yeah.
or Newark Penn, and then Long Island with the exception of the Port Washington, every
Yeah, it's also
train goes
Jamaica,
through
yeah.
Jamaica.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, so you're getting this like really completely show up and go. Nobody ever looks at the timetables, frequencies to a place like Newark or Newark Broad or Jamaica, and then yeah, I mean farther out, yeah, if it's a train every 15 or 20 minutes, people look at a timetable, but that's for stations that are half an hour out of Manhattan. Certainly in more urban parts, it could be more.
just a funny aside, if you ever taken the train from on weekends to New Jersey, what they are running is they run 3 trains quick, very close together. There'll be one train, another 10 minutes later, 10 minutes later, and then the same thing in the other direction. And that is because they are running the equivalent of one tube service, even though 95% of the time they have both tubes available. So what they could do is they could say, we're going to run 2 tube service and we'll have plenty of trains throughout the hour. And then once a quarter, when they change the schedules, they're going to have limited service. Instead, for convenience sake, they've had limited service. And this is how I discovered this. I started going back. There's a fellow who actually keeps as a hobby all timetables. And he had them going back to the 1970s. And I kept going back further and further and further to see when they started this. They've always done this since Amtrak was born in the 1970s. They have run the equivalent of one tube service under the Hudson because they want to have the possibility that they're going to close the other tube. That's 50 years. And I thought, does it take 50 years to fix the tube? And then when I did the foils, I realized they're never fixing the tube. They're, 2% of the weekends they're doing the work. So this next week is October. The Gateway Development Commission will be submitting a new updated financial plan to the FTA for their tunnel. It's going to be, I don't know, $18 billion, whatever it is. They try and reduce the costs by removing from their plan different aspects. So they had the Hudson casings, Hudson Yards, that's now out of the plan. So even though that cost $1 billion, they say, oh, it just got cheaper by $1 billion. They actually wanted to remove the repair from the thing to save $2 billion. Of course, the money still has to be spent. When they submit this plan, I am almost entirely certain they're going to say in this document that Amtrak closes one of the tubes every weekend for 55 hours of repair. That is not true. It's never been true, but they keep saying it in the documents. Maybe they believe it. I actually spoke to people at Amtrak who believed, even high-ranking people, that they closed every week, and because the service is dedicated for one. But when you look at the documents and you talk to the people on the operations, like, no, rarely will they close both tubes. So it's back to their thinking. They've inconvenienced travelers on weekends for 50 years. If you're going to Newark Airport from Manhattan on a weekend, you want to catch that air train, you got to really deal with that very bunched service on New Jersey Transit. Or if you're just making a regular trip out there, all for no reason, because their priority does not seem to be, efficient rail operations. They just want to make it easier for themselves. So once in a rare occasion they have to close the tube, they can do so without changing their schedule pattern. It's very annoying. And if you ever have to go to New Jersey for New York on the weekend, you'll understand. And it doesn't have to be this way.
All right.
A bit of an aside, but
I mean, everything we do is asides. It's fine. So Michael, I'm gonna get to you in one sec. Margaret Tobin is asking, or not asking, pointing out that corporation on fare collection actually happened with EasyPass. And yeah, I mean, corporation on fares and fare collection does have some precedents. So for example, in the Bay Area, everyone uses the same fare media, which is Clipper. No, they don't integrate the fares. The fares on, let's say, Caltrain and the buses are not the same. if you travel in the same area, and I don't think you get free transfers, but it's the same fare media. So some of that integration work has been done, but really what they needed is to come up with, let's say, a fare system where a train between Jamaica and Penn Station costs X, and it's the same X regardless of whether you take LRR or the subway, in the same way that it's the same X whether you take a local or express subway line, to make sure that the transfers are free, and to make sure that the timetables, maybe it's not that relevant for the subway, the timetables, but to make sure that the buses, for example, connect to the commuter rail.
Well, I think it's more.
If the commuter rail like comes every, maybe not every 10 minutes, but if the commuter trains come every 30 minutes, you want to make sure the bus doesn't get to the commuter train station at a random time, but let's say 5 minutes before the train
But
leaves. So it's
in terms of cooperation, if you're in Long Island, you're going to New Jersey, you have to have two separate.
yeah, that too, of course. And
systems.
the third service is itself a kind of cooperation, exactly.
Right.
Okay, so okay, so I want to go back to Michael for a moment, and this is 2 questions. So about Northeast Corridor and high-speed stuff. The answer to most questions is I will know better in a year. But one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how to have everything fit together. And this does, again, it's not something that you see in the model, because the model is something that doesn't really extend much past 7th Avenue or almost 9th Avenue. It's a little bit, you can think of it as kind of the view from 9th Avenue, New Yorker cartoon, but but obviously it's all based on, okay, let's think about what can happen elsewhere. So this means that, for example, so one of the reasons that the design here, this one has separate platforms for commuter trains through 32nd Street to North River tunnels and intercity trains, is that I want to preserve the possibility that because of some kind of scheduling issue, literally you're going to have to space to write a timetable, whereas the commuter train squats on one track and then the intercity train overtakes it at the station. It's going to be a disaster for many things if it has to happen, but I want to preserve the possibility of doing such a thing. So so this is the connection. Of course, things that happen well outside New York could be influenced by that, things like on the Northeast Corridor in Jersey or in Connecticut. So this is why maybe one thing, the fact that it's 8 and not 6 platforms is maybe not obvious.
Just one of the notes here, it says, please discuss and confirm that frequent Penn Station off-peak service, off-peak and through running is totally possible, even without doing the 2 Penn Plaza, or with current configuration, current equipment, current infrastructure. You know, part of it is just the confusion at Penn Station. You don't know which way is which way. And I mean, it seems obvious to me that they could do that. But again, they don't want to. Now, maybe if one of these plans to fix Penn Station, to remove most, if not all, of the upper level, to extend the I've told many people, and I've walked through Penn Station with them, some in government leadership, others in different aspects, that the Long Island Railroad in the 1980s paid $90 million, 90% of the cost, to build the Claytor-Skinnell Rail Control Center. Amtrak paid 10%. New Jersey put in nothing. For that $90 million and 90% of the expense, Long Island won the right to fix up its half of Penn Station. What did they do? They extended all tracks to 12-car length. They built the central corridor, central concourse, to add a vertical access. They built the West End concourse to add vertical access. They actually added air conditioning. They did what they can to maximize their part of the station, and to have each train have 5 vertical access points when they pull in. New Jersey was offered to join that, and they said, no, we're not interested. You talk to Kevin Corbett now, who runs New Jersey Transit. He said it was a missed opportunity. New Jersey is the largest single player NJ Transit at Penn Station, since the Long Island has shifted a number of riders and trains to Grand Central, but they don't have access to control their own trains. Their part of the station was never fixed up. The Central corridor stops at track 13. The West End Concourse used to stop at track 13. They extended it. Now it stops at track 5. So by making Penn Station as efficient as possible, by extending the Central corridor all the way down to track 1 immediately, by extending the West End Concourse all the way down to track 1 immediately, by adding vertical access points, you could start improving the efficiency of the station, even if the garden stays place, even if 2 Penn Plaza stays in place, but they don't seem interested. They are looking, well, what can we do? What can we do? And instead of doing what the Long Island Railroad did all those decades ago, they said, we have limited time, limited budget. How do we make this as best as we can? And they've done it. They've made it fairly efficient. Those trains can come in and go out. And the New Jersey section, it didn't matter until the opening of Midtown Direct Service in the summer of '96, when the M&E basically doubled the number of trains and people coming into Penn Station, which then caused them to do ARC. And of course, we mentioned the ideal ARC solution was 2 new tubes into Penn and then to Grand Central. 20 years later, we're still talking about that. But now the railroads are looking at stub end stations at $18 billion each. Sorry for the editorial, but that's what I do for a living.
Yeah, I mean, so the only thing I will say is that to add to this is that if you have the capacity to do this at the peak, you have the capacity to do this off peak. So essentially, frequency increases off peak are free from the perspective of capital expansion capacity. Through running almost certainly as well. I mean, the point of through running is, I mean, think about it. If unless you're inducing more traffic to Penn Station, you might through better service. Through running means all of these commute volumes that I was showing you before. These ones.
The trains would not be running empty, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They come into Penn Station and they take passengers either, out to Queens or back to New Jersey, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and if you look at this graphic, like, if you run service to so right now these people, let's say people commuting Jersey to Long Island, not a single one of them gets off or on at Penn Station. Because I mean, not today. I mean, with running, because they don't work in Manhattan. It's not going to induce more people.
They just sit on the train and it
exactly
goes out, right?
Yeah, and if anything, today they congest Penn Station when they change trains at Penn Station. I know people who do that commute. Not many, and they hate it, but there exist people who do that commute. So if anything, so running is one of the things that I don't think by itself congests Penn Station more. Again, if it induces more service and there's better service at peak, then sure, but off peak and through are essentially free. It's just that,
this is interesting. In October, there's NIMTIC, which is the planning agency for New York and Northern New Jersey, is going to require the railroads to submit their ridership numbers. It's always done in October. It's done on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, which is not a holiday. So there's a narrow number of times, and they actually do a head count, and they will see what it is, and we'll see how many people are actually coming in at rush hour. They go through and they count every person. And this is what the numbers that the FTA uses, and what the railroads use, for making the, and other, it's the, an annual report put out by NIMTIC, but the raw numbers are going to be collected in October. And I'm going to ask New Jersey Transit, what did you find? How many people are coming in that peak hour of rush hour? They used to have 21 trains. I think they are running 21 trains, but they're running shorter trains. Instead of, 10 cars, they're running maybe an 8-car train or a 7-car train. So their ability to expand is there. And, they were getting up to close to near capacity before COVID, but now they're half of that, I would guess. It be generous at the peak of rush. And by the time to actually get up to needing 50 trains per hour we'll all be in Elon Musk's, space cars by then, 200 years from now. And, just to make another pitch that it's really crazy to do this 780 plan. And hopefully officials in New York and New Jersey would say, this doesn't make any sense. The biggest backer of this plan is Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader. And in July 6th, he was out there celebrating that the tunnel just is going to get $7 billion of federal grant. It's like, okay, great. Now it's going to cost $50 billion to do the whole thing. You need another $43 billion. Can you produce that? But he was asked several times, Chuck, where should those trains go? Should they go to 780? And he said, I don't want to get into that. Well, he doesn't want to get into it because it's politically unpopular. No one wants to tear down a block, and it makes no sense. And it's going to cost $18 billion. And he's glad he got 7. So if they can say, you know what, we don't need this. This is a waste of time. It's a waste of money. Look at what these folks have done. Look what others have done. And, to actually use your brain instead of just taking, this is how we've always done it. This is how we must do it in the future. Anyways, anything, I got to go in a few minutes. Anything you want to do? Talk
Yeah,
about?
I mean, there are a couple more things. I can stay here for another 10 or 15 minutes, but so Andrew Conson is saying that the position of the RP of the Regional Plan Association, and said Tom Wright, is that 780, so demolishing this block and leaving MSG in place is the best option for fixing the station. Okay, it's, as we said, it's something like, I think it's $16.7 billion to build Penn expansion, for which the benefits are 0. Again, it's not going to ever get you more trains through this, because if you do, so again, through running is more efficient than stub end work, but stub end work with the new tunnel, with the existing, southern Penn Station tracks, can be done. It's going to require some operational changes. We're talking things like pre-positioning crews on the platform so that they don't have to kind of salmon their way against the traffic of passengers when they get to the station, which is a thing that is causing some delays sometimes. But if they pre-position and do things like that, they can turn fast enough that the 5 or 6 southernmost tracks can handle that traffic. So
I'd like to
don't
say,
spend the 17 billion that you don't have.
Well, it's also, they mentioned, Tom Wright, the RPA. Well, the position of the RPA for a long time was move Madison Square Garden until they changed, a few weeks ago. Now they want to leave it in place.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, especially because, City Council only gave them a 5-year permit. Like, City Council is basically signaling, okay, we see all these proposals to move them, let's investigate. It's my rate of City Council.
The, so the RPA, who's on the board of the RPA?
They're very institutional. Like, the RPA isn't very combative against things that the MTA.
And so if the RPA has an extra, $20 billion handy, maybe they want to put it down. Of course, I don't know how many people on the RPA board live on block 780 will have their homes destroyed.
Does anyone live on block 780? That was pure.
Yes. No.
There's this big part. All I know is there's a big parking garage there that should probably be replaced for something better.
There's hundreds of people. There's lots of apartments there.
Okay.
And if it's not needed, yes, we could spend more money, but we could spend other things. Just a quick example: Portal North Bridge is now $2 billion or $2.2 billion. The same bridge can be built for 1/10 that amount of money as a low movable bridge. And Amtrak and New Jersey Transit doesn't want to do it, and their answer is like, well, these are good jobs. We're investing in union wages. Well, why don't you take the $2 billion and instead of building one bridge at $2 billion, build 10 bridges at $200 million each? You get the same amount of investment in those good union jobs, and the construction companies get their contracts, but the public, which is paying for all this, actually gets 9 additional bridges to use, or maybe build 5 bridges and put the money into something else. So building things which are hugely expensive and then saying this is an investment is really crazy. I often use the example of if we get $1 billion, we could have construction companies all the same. AECOM, STV, dig out a huge hole and all those good union jobs. And then we get another $1 billion, we could fill it in. So now we've spent $2 billion. We've invested in good construction jobs and union positions for working people that they can then support their families and then to spread the money around. And these big companies get money, but we don't have anything. We have a filled in hole. So if we're going to be spending billions of dollars, use the money as efficiently as possible, not as inefficiently as possible. I mean, just go back and look at the transit cost report. I mean, why did it cost, I don't know, $1 billion or $2 billion per mile for the Second Avenue subway? I mean, Gateway is what, 2 miles? And since you have to build all 9 pieces at $50 billion to make it do something, that's what, $25 billion per mile or whatever the amount is?
I wouldn't call it 25 billion per mile because I mean, it's like a lot of the other stuff is,
Okay,
I mean,
8 billion per mile, whatever it is, it's a
yeah,
lot.
it's really, yeah, I mean,
It's a lot.
It's more
It's a
expensive
lot,
than
and
the tunneling for Second Avenue subway by a large margin, and we tried figuring out why, and we couldn't.
But it wasn't the tunneling, it was the build out of those stations. You know,
No,
why
right,
have
but
such
even
an
the,
average
right, no,
station?
this is why it is why I'm comparing it to the Second Avenue subway tunneling, which was 25% of the cost.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna head off. This has been fascinating. I hope other people have had a chance to hear something interesting. I think that the 3D simulation you did of the Penn Station is fascinating. And you did it all for less than $5 billion, I assume.
For a lot less than 5 billion, but
and
yeah.
It's just my last word. It shows, like, since there's so much money involved, tens of billions of dollars, $40 billion, $50 billion. Let's look at everything. What makes sense? You know, the city council doesn't want the garden there, whether the garden's there or not. Why do the railroads refuse to cooperate in everything? Why do they have separate cleaning departments? If they can't cooperate in that, how can they cooperate in anything else? And that if the public is paying for this, this is all public, public tax dollars. It's not like, the Pennsylvania Railroad, which used its own private money that it raised from its stockholders and it's putting out bonds. It's all government money, and that the government needs to be accountable, and the government leaders have to tell the railroads which work for them, do this to save money, do this to save time, do this to save convenience for people in neighborhoods who on demolition, do this to save it so for passengers. Anyways, I will leave you with that. I could go on all day, but I got some other things to attend to. So if you want to continue, go on. I'll watch the recording, and nice to be with you.
I need to leave in like 5 or 10 minutes anyway, but yeah, thanks
thank
for
everyone who is watching. I'm going to sign off now. Thanks everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Michael. I have to leave too, Laura.
Ciao, ciao. I'm gonna stay on for like a few more minutes just to close the last questions, but right. So now on such D. You're saying that okay, so first of all, if you're asking if I've simulated anything, the answer is not yet. Also, you're asking me if the model would be able to support through running with changes like fewer platforms or one platforms, and the answer is yes, it is possible. Like, remember, through running is possible with no change to the platforms. Like, the only real change to the platform that I think is necessary for even peak capacity is adding those vertical access points to the New Jersey Transit platforms that the LR already has, which is a small proportion of Penn reconstruction. Okay, so Daniel, I don't know if it's pronounced Kazan or Chazan, Chazan. You're pointing out that people need to wait on the platform before the train arrives. Yeah, this is pretty normal, and Penn Station doesn't let you do that because they're paranoid about safety of what happens if people wait on the platform. But it's pretty bullshit. Like the passengers can get off the train, and like even with a narrow platforms, it's one of the things I realized recently is something with the fire code. The fire code requires, it's called NFPA 130. It requires that you should have enough throughput to evacuate a full train under emergency conditions in 4 minutes. It is, but the train needs to, but you should assume every track that can be occupied is. So, because they don't timetable very well at Penn Station, 2 tracks facing the same platform could be occupied. So essentially, one train needs to be evacuable in 2 minutes. But if you timetable better, instead of a 2-minute limit, you have a 4-minute limit, and it's so it's something that the platforms, I think, could do. The narrowest platform can do that because it's only facing one track, the track 17. And so so you can have passengers wait on the platform. Like, you don't need to corral passengers away from the platform until the very end. That's pretty stupid. At a lot of the smaller Amtrak stations, you should get on without any kind of platform control. Hell, Penn Station doesn't have full platform access. You can go around and go through another entrance. So it's something that is possible. It's just, again, Amtrak's tradition is not to do that, but Amtrak's tradition is not necessarily best practice. Sorry if I'm doing it lightning round. As I said, I do need to live in a few minutes. Olive Freud is asking, what about extending the subway to New Jersey, like the plans to 7 to Secaucus? I mean, I don't think Secaucus is a great location unless they do a lot of redevelopment there. But yeah, subway extensions to New Jersey are not bad. It's just, first of all, expensive, and second, you still need to do things to provide more commuter rail capacity, because practically 100% of the people who wish to enter Penn Station from New Jersey don't live in Hudson County. Hudson County already has PATH. It doesn't have any stations on New Jersey Transit except Secaucus, and Secaucus is not near, and it is not near anything built up. It's pure transfer. So you still need to do something about the main line, and making passengers do a last mile transfer to the subway. That's what a lot of cities did before they did through running. Munich, for example, did that, and because it was inefficient and a lot of people made the transfer, that's where they built through running. Okay, on asset and D, I'm actually gonna take this a little more. So Pat Foy also used the 1 million a day figure for lost money due to not building Gateway. I actually think this could be higher, and the reason it could be higher is that the value of the station, the value of the project, is proportional to how much use you can get out of it. So if you do things like much higher frequency, if you do make service just smoother, by which I mean you do things like electrification, high platforms, make the trains faster, more reliable, it increases the value of more rail service, to the point that I would argue that I don't think the Hudson Tunnel project, and I think this tunnel is worthwhile if you guarantee to me that the service levels will stay as bad as today, but in the future they could be bigger, and then it's not going to be something that's only worth 1 million a day. Maybe it could be worth more than that if more people could be induced to take the train for better service, if that makes sense. Okay, more people are asking things and asking follow-ups. So okay. So Stephen Marvin is asking, if there were through service between New Jersey Transit and the LIR, how would revenue be shared? And would there be staffing issues? So there would not be staffing issues because, first of all, you can change drivers at Penn Station. This is what was done in Paris at the RATP SNCF boundary at Gardino. They no longer do that, but they used to. In Tokyo, there's a lot of through service, sometimes 3, maybe even 4 railroads on a single thing, and they, I believe they change the drivers. They pull the rolling stock. They agree on revenue sharing based on some kind of formula based on ridership in each section. So they do exact counts. For example, in Germany, they do counts every couple years. In Berlin, it's every 3 years. To write the contract for how the revenue is divvied based on relative ridership levels. So it's something that is done, and it's so setting up a Verkehrsverbund. It's not trivial, but it's also not impossible. Okay. Oh, David, link to the, okay, so David is asking for a link to this map. It is in chat. Again, it's at etany.org/modernizing commuter rail brief. The non-brief version is very long. As the computer, it is very long, and will be out very soon. Okay, I know that he's asking about the odds that different rail agencies will manage to cooperate. I mean, the president kind of thinks that something like that is going to be part of his legacy, so some things are possible. I mean, everyone keeps telling me that it's impossible to get MSG to move, and then they expressed openness to it a couple months ago, and city council only gave them a 5-year permit. I mean, in Switzerland, they refused to cooperate until the Swiss state told them to kindly coordinate the service on the various components of, I think it was the canton of Zurich, as a precondition for giving them more money for investment. So all these things are things that sound politically impossible until they aren't. That's why a lot of it is just someone needs to say, okay, let's do it. Oh, Stephen is asking if the use of wider platforms enable Amtrak to have ticket presenting at the top of the escalators or stairs. What is ticket presenting? Like, you get on a train, you never have to show ticket to anyone here. You show a ticket to a conductor because intercity trains always have conductors. You don't need to show ticket at the train station here ever. So you don't need that extra stage. That's just extra security theater they don't need. Okay, Matthew Aronson saying that it was PR bullshit. I think it was about the openness to move for MSG. If they wanted money, I mean, they wanted money and they wanted land near there. I think it was the Vishal Chakrabarti plan to give them the blocks south of Macy's. So it's demolitions, but maybe demolitions of other things. So I mean, at the end of the day, the city can deny them the permit. I mean, yeah, they can sue, but NIMBYs with much more political power and who are much less publicly loathed, I think, than Dolan lost it like that. Like, it's not, I mean, people, I think, overestimate how much certain actors are veto points. Okay. Okay. What else? So, oh, yeah, Joe, you're pointing out good that Penn expansion would also move passengers one block farther south than where they want to go, and because most people are trying to go midtown to go north of Penn Station. Yeah, exactly. I also even have this critique of Moynihan Station that is one block to the west of where most people want to go. Okay. What else is there? I'm sounding a lot less coherent than when I'm responding in chat while talking, because usually I respond to chat in chat when other people are talking. Yeah, ticket checking in top of stairs is what Amtrak does now, Stephen, but they don't need to do that. They really do not need to do that. They have conductors. The conductors check everyone on the trains. They're not going to cut the conductors. I don't think they should cut the conductors. They don't need to do that. It's just hostility to passengers for no real reason. Oh, Stephen, sorry. You're asking if it would allow her to stop the practice of ticket checking. They can stop it right now. It's completely irrelevant how wide or narrow the platforms are. I think the easiest time to do it is actually, the easiest place to do it is actually platforms that are more like Grand Central. So where it's a terminal station with one main access point is what is sometimes done on TGVs, and it's not a good practice at all. But Penn Station is not like that. This is why you can go around the upstairs ticket check. You can just go to a different exit or a different concourse. It's just there's again pure theater. What else? Okay, yeah, Joe. So yeah, you're saying that the LRR will post a track number before the trains hit the platform, and Amtrak will not do that for itself or nurture trains. So Amtrak will sometimes do that on the arrival board. I think the arrival board sometimes tell you what track a train is arriving on before the departure board. So if you know that your, let's say, regional train to Boston is arriving from DC, you can look at one of the smaller screens. But yeah, it's entirely, it's kind of a life hack, but it's not something that is intended use. And a lot of it is just they're trying to gate platforms, which again is supposed to be a kind of fire safety practice, but they do the same thing at Boston South Station, which is much easier to gate because again, it's a terminal where trains where the trains and platforms have one access point. So you walk through the concourse at grade toward the platform, and they just like doing that, and it's just a bad, again, it's just a bad practice. They don't need to. And one of the things, by the way, so certainly with better timetabling, they could know the platform number months in advance. In Germany, when you buy a train ticket, or in Japan, you buy a train ticket, the platform number is printed on because they know it in advance, like months in advance. And I'm kind of assuming that with a train station model where the platform, maybe the track number could change, but it's always going to face the same platform, so you know where to stand. Right, yeah, so thank you everyone else for watching. I think for everyone for who's still here for sticking by when a 1 hour event has been 2 hours 15 minutes. Just one last thing. So Zoe, you're asking me about books or reports that envision future transportation. The answer is I don't. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about future tech, but future tech has a problem, which is it's like investing in a startup. Most startups fail. Most of the new tech that you hear about is going to turn into be vaporware. Either it's physically impossible, or it's possible but uneconomic. Or it's possible and economic, but people do other things. The example that I keep going to is Zoom. So during the early stage of the pandemic, Zoom became a huge company suddenly with this new firm that was becoming maybe still smaller than Facebook or Google, but kind of same order of magnitude. And it no longer is. People still Zoom. This is a conversation on Zoom. It's a webinar on Zoom. But maybe video chatting is not the killer tech that changes everything. It's useful. It's something useful, but it's not a $1 trillion company or anything like that. So there are also books that things like the Three Revolutions, but I don't actually know to what extent that is real versus something that is almost real but isn't actually going to pan out. It's a very common thing for proposals for Amtrak. Yeah, so thank you everyone, and I think the rest of the questions are just comments. So thank you for sticking by. Thank you for everyone who publicized this. We're certainly we're going to talk more about this when the ETA report is out, whenever that happens. Again, I hope for sooner release, but edits will take as long as they take. So thank you everyone, and whether you're watching here or on YouTube, and I will hopefully see you soon with something more. I hope that there's going to be better advocacy as a result. The plans are going to improve as a result of what we've shown today. So thank you everyone, and ciao.